Hello everyone. Today we are starting a new series on Postman API testing tools. Postman is an excellent testing tool. Today marks our first session for manual API testing. We'll begin with the basics. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Make sure to watch the video till the end. Let's start today's session. Before discussing API testing in detail, we will focus on the basics. We'll cover what an API is, what API testing entails, the various types of testing, the concept of an application, the functioning of a web server, the idea of a client-server relationship, and the tools available in the market. Why do we need testing for API? Whenever we develop software, it's based on customer or market feedback. We conduct various types of testing to enhance the software's quality and improve our delivery. This includes front-end testing, where we assess web functionality, and back-end testing, covering database testing and API testing. API testing, specifically, falls under back-end testing. Today, we are going to delve into the details of API. Before doing so, we will cover the basics. Let's start with the basics of web applications. To understand the fundamentals, a diagram is copied from the internet to illustrate how it works. In this diagram, a desktop system is shown. It can be a desktop, a laptop, or a mobile device, as we use laptops and mobiles to access applications. Inside the desktop, we have a browser, which can be any browser like Chrome, Firefox, or Opera. This browser becomes the client system. When we want to access a website, let's say Google's website, we open a browser on our laptop, desktop, or mobile. We can use any browser, such as Chrome, Firefox, Opera, or Internet Explorer. We then enter the URL, like www.google.com. A request is sent from the laptop or mobile to the web server via the internet. The web server, where the actual software or web application resides, responds to our request. This Google page is not installed on our client system. The software is installed on the server. We send a request from our client, and it goes through the internet to the web server. The web server, based on the client's request, responds by sending the HTML page to be displayed on the client system. So, in this process, communication occurs through request and response. The client, whether it's a desktop, laptop, or mobile, sends a request to the web server, and the web server responds with the requested HTML page. This communication is known as client-server communication, and the architecture is termed client-server architecture. The full form of the API is Application Programming Interface. Suppose we have different types of applications, and if we want to communicate them with each other, we use API. It is done for two different types of applications. Okay, the definition is understood. Now, those two applications may have different technologies, and their platforms may also differ. In our two applications, if we understand where API comes in the communication of the web application, let's use the same diagram we saw earlier. So, there is an API in the middle. In this diagram copied from the net, as I told you, this server side is fine. If any browser opens, the request will go through the internet. Where will it go? To the API, because this API is acting as a mediator. It is working as a mediator between the client and the server. The application programming interface is acting as an interface between the client and the server. It acts as the mediator. The request will go to the API first, and then the API will send this request to the server. Okay? So this is our middle layer. API is in our middle layer. If we examine the layers, this is our middle and this is our presentation layer. Okay, and this is our database layer where we have all our data. The API is in the server itself, the database is in the server itself, and the web server is in the server itself. Okay, this is our server side. All three components are on the server side. It functions as a mediator between the client and the server. What does the intermediary do between the web server and the database? Whatever the request is from the client, the entire business logic is written near the API. The programming interface programs all the business logic. It is in this middle layer. Business logic occurs in the middle layer. It's the entire program. The application programming interface is a program between two applications. It's a program interface, an API. One application is on our server side, and between these two, that's the mediator. Extracting whatever data from the web database to send to the application, to send it to the client side, or to add something to the database from the client side, then the entire application programming interface does it. Okay, whatever data we fetch from the Spring, we have to display it on the web on the browser. On the application, it uses the API. And if any data from the client needs to be added to the database, inserted, then it uses the API itself. All the business logic written inside the API is fine. So, the testing we conduct on the front end is called web testing. And the testing we perform on the API is referred to as API testing in the middle layer. The overall testing process is termed API testing, which stands for Application Programming Interface Testing. Additionally, the testing we execute on the database is known as database testing. I draw the diagram here. First of all, our presentation layer, which has become our web page. Okay, now to develop the presentation layer, we need scripting languages, for example, scripting languages like HTML, JavaScript, CSS. For the application programming interface, we need programming languages like .NET, C++, Java, Python, C#. The application programming interface comes under this. The last one is our database layer, where we have Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, etc. Now, see here, all three layers. For front-end design, scripting language is required. For API programming, we need programming skills, and for the database, we need database knowledge. So here, all three tasks are done by different teams. Different teams handle them. The presentation is handled by a separate team. The middle layer is handled by a separate team, and last one is database layer handled by a separate team. This is our web page, so whatever request will come from the web page, it will go through API to the backend, and whatever response will go through API, it will also go through API to the client. Here is our client here, but this is our client, and this is our server. This will be our server side, but we do API testing. Whatever API developer is developing, we test it on the API layer. For that, we do not need a web page. We directly send the request to the API and check the response here. Then API testing is done here. It is done directly with the API. For that, we do not do web page testing. Web page testing is done separately. Okay, but on the API, database testing is done on the database side. Okay. Now, why is API testing necessary? Why is API testing necessary? Testing is necessary because if it goes wrong, then we can't do web page testing. We cannot do it. Why is it necessary to do testing? Then it is necessary to do API testing. This is because the communication that is going on in the entire web application, the web communication is going on only through the API. If there is a problem in our API, then there will be a problem in our complete communication. The web application, which is our web page, will not function properly if our middle layer API is not working perfectly. That's why API testing is very important. This is the first point. Now, the second point, the main point, is that the web application that is being developed by a separate team runs separately. So many times it happens that our web page is not ready, and our team is developing the API. The API is developed and ready. Then we do API testing directly on the API, and we do testing with the web page later. So whenever we do API testing, the majority of our testing is done at our API level only. Around 70–80% of testing gets done in API testing because our business logic, which is the actual logic, is on the API layer. So that's why API testing is very important. This is the second point. API interface testing is what we cover in our web testing. We cover it on the presentation layer. We do the web page testing, which is UI testing. It is not that UI testing is not important. It is important. It is not that only API testing is important. It is also very important, because we can check some functionality only through UI testing. But if we have done our API testing well, then the majority of our testing gets completed here. And then, when we do web testing, we test the web page. So it takes very little effort and time. It takes very little time. It is done for a long time. Web testing is done very easily, which we do using Selenium. We do it when we do web testing of HTML web applications. So it takes very little time to test the application if our API testing is done well. If API communication is fine, then the entire application will work properly. If API is running properly, API is perfect, then all communication will be fine. Next, we will discuss about types of APIs. First up, we've got SOAP, that's Simple Object Access Protocol. It's been around for a while, but honestly, it's kind of like the grandparent of APIs. A bit old school, you know? Companies aren't buzzing about SOAP as much these days. And then we've got REST, Representational State Transfer. Now, this one is the rock star of APIs at the moment. It's like the cool kid on the block, and everybody wants to hang out with REST. Now, both SOAP and REST fall under the umbrella of web services. But here's the deal. REST is stealing the spotlight. It's super popular in today's tech scene, but wait. What exactly are web services, and how are they different from APIs? Well, that's what we're diving into in the next slide. Now let's delve into the comparison between APIs and web services. APIs are typically developed in the development environment, as you can see here. This is our development environment, and over here is our testing environment. In this scenario, we have a team of developers working on creating APIs, while another team, the QA team, is responsible for API testing. The development is carried out in-house, and we don't need internet access for this internal process. Once the development phase is complete, the application is then sent to the QA team for API testing. After successful API testing, the application is ready to move to the production environment. This transition to the production environment is what we refer to as web services. It's in this phase that internet access becomes essential. It's important to note that web services are a type of API. All web services are APIs, but the reverse isn't necessarily true. Not every API is a web service. When an API is made available for public access, that's when it becomes a web service. So, while all web services are APIs, not all APIs are web services. Keep in mind that it's not mandatory for APIs to be used publicly. Some APIs are designed for internal communication. I hope this clears up the distinction between APIs and web services. Now let's dive into API testing tools. We can categorize these tools into two types, those used for manual API testing and those used for automated API testing. In the market, there are numerous tools available for testing APIs. Examples include Postman, SoapUI, and Rest Assured, among others. However, in this series, our main focus will be on the Postman tool, specifically for manual API testing. Postman is a fantastic tool for manual API testing, and the best part? You don't need to be a coding wizard. A little bit of JavaScript knowledge and understanding of APIs are all you need. In this session, we've covered topics like how web applications work, understanding the client-server dynamic, the significance of APIs, why API testing is crucial, the types of APIs, the distinctions between APIs and web services, and finally, we delved into API testing tools. If you found this information helpful, stay tuned for more insights in our series.